So, tell me more about this Lord of Inordinate Retribution. I've got a few player characters that might need to draw his attention soon. Today, we're talking about the latest book in the Lost Omens line, Impossible Lands, on this episode of The Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello travelers and tourists, my name is Mark and I am the local disaster tour guide. That's right, I am a storyteller who considers the spell Summon Ancient Fleshforged to be the most obvious evil villain spell I have ever seen published in a book. Thank you, Paizo. Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder, and welcome to another review on this channel. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the book Lost Omens Impossible Lands, a setting book for the Golarion setting for use with Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Now, it is worth noting that this video is going to be a brief overview of the contents of this book and a quick snapshot of my thoughts about this book. But, as with any review that I do on this channel, I do advise you to remember the grain of salt that I always give you, which is the best review you will ever get of any product is to check it out for yourself. So if you have an opportunity to maybe check this book out at a local game store or borrow it from a friend and get a look at it firsthand, that is always going to tell you whether or not a product is truly right for you. Still, I hope that my thoughts and insights might be helpful to you if you're thinking about picking this book up. Now, Lost Omens Impossible Lands is technically part of the Lost Omens line for Pathfinder 2e, but Lost Omens has almost become two separate lines of books that Paizo is publishing. There is the main Lost Omens line, which has things like the World Guide, the Character Guide, and the Ancestry Guide, and then there is a newer series that started with Lost Omens Mwangi Expanse, and that was followed with Lost Omens Absalom, which are sort of deep dives into the specific regions in the Lost Omens setting. Lost Omens Impossible Lands is the third book in this style that is doing a deep dive into one of the major areas in the Pathfinder setting, and if you can't tell from the title, it's looking at what is commonly referred to as the Impossible Lands, one of the most magic-heavy sections of the entire Golarion setting. And I do think that the wild and intensely magical nature of this part of the Golarion setting shines forward through this book in fun and interesting ways. Now, before I dive into this review, there is one thing that I want to say really quick. Technically, Paizo did send me a review copy of the PDF for Lost Omens Impossible Lands for me to make a video on this channel. However, there was some kind of internal email error, I don't know exactly what went wrong, and unfortunately my PDF copy of Impossible Lands actually got sent to me 3 days after the physical copy of the book arrived. So in full disclosure, Paizo did send me a review copy. It showed up late. I'm not upset with Paizo in any way. I know that things go wrong sometimes. But just for the sake of full clarity, Paizo did send me a review copy of the PDF for this book, but they did not tell me what I needed to say in this review or give me any talking points for this review. My thoughts in this video are entirely my own. So today we're going to take a look at this book, what it contains, and what my thoughts on this book are. But before we do all of that, please remember to do all of the YouTube stuff. If you enjoy this video, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. You can check out my free Discord and my Patreon. Both of those will be linked in the video description. And as always, the most important thing you can do is to jump down into the comments section and offer your thoughts, your insights, where you agree and disagree. Your feedback is one of my favorite things about running this channel. I love to hear what you have to say. But with all of that out of the way, let's get started. Now, if you've seen any of my previous reviews, you know that I love to begin at the end, give you my overall thoughts about a product, and then kind of work my way through the product to give you an idea of how I came to that conclusion. And that means we're going to start with the overall grade for Lost Omens Impossible Lands, and after careful consideration, I am going to give Lost Omens Impossible Lands a grade of a solid B. Now, that may not sound like a very impressive grade, but here's what you need to understand. This is a C-tier product. When I am offering grades on products, I try to look at them primarily through the lens of how much use will you get out of a given product. A product may be a very well-developed product, it may be very strong and very interesting, but if it is a book or a game aid that you're not going to get a lot of use out of, I feel like it deserves a lower grade because you're just not going to get as much for your money. A weaker book that sees more common use is going to give you more for your money. So as a general rule, I rank utility very highly. That's not knocking more niche products, I just think it's an important consideration when you're deciding where and how to spend your money. And the Lost Omens line, especially these Lost Omen region setting books, are really the definition of C-tier products for me. They are niche products. They are very useful when you are dealing with that particular thing, but when you step outside of that particular thing, their utility will quickly dry up. Mwange Expanse covers my favorite region in the Golarion setting, and yet I gave that book a C+, because while I generally think it's a good book, it is also a book that doesn't see a lot of use at my table. But today, I have decided to break my own rules and give a C-tier product a B rating, because Paizo, if you are watching this video, Lost Omens Impossible Lands is what I want the Lost Omens series to be. You get a B because this is what it needs to be. Yes, it's a bad pun, but if you watch this video, you knew those were coming anyways. Seriously, I am impressed with this book. I think it is very well done, and this is about as good as you can make a niche product book be in my mind. Paizo has done a fantastic job. Let's talk strengths and weaknesses. Up first, I want to get the weaknesses out of the way, because if I'm being honest, Impossible Lands doesn't have a lot of weaknesses in my mind. There are some areas in the book where if I really want to be nitpicky, I can. But overall, I don't feel like this book has glaring weaknesses, at least not in my mind. One of the nitpicky weaknesses of Impossible Lands is Paizo's approach to some of the new ancestries. All of the new ancestries in this book follow a format that I'm not the biggest fan of, in that they have a defined ability boost, a free ability boost, and no ability flaws. Now, this is something that we have seen in Pathfinder 2e before. Certain ancestries, such as the Orc, break the typical ancestry format, and instead of having 2 defined boosts, a free boost, and a flaw, they just have 1 defined boost and 1 free boost. And if I'm being honest, I've always been a little hesitant about that design approach, mostly because it feels a little too much like D&D 5e for me, and the way they handle ability boosts in that game. Generally speaking, I like the idea of ancestries coming with both positives and negatives, because I think it makes choices inside the game more interesting. And while certain ancestries I'm comfortable with the newer design for ability boosts only, it's not something I like to see universally. And to give you a couple of examples, the way they write the new ancestry of the Nagaji in this book, it kind of makes sense that the Nagaji would have a boost to strength, a free boost, and no flaw. The way they are written, it fits with how they're described. But some of the other ancestries in this book, it doesn't fit. For example, one of the new ancestries that we're going to talk about is the Gorin, which is a group of plant people, and it specifically says that the Gorin have trouble communicating with animal species, and and that they often forget to tell allies and members of other ancestries important information that those people might need to know because they just don't think the same way. That sounds like a charisma flaw to me. There's just a disconnect between the mechanics and the way the ancestry is described, and yes, I realize I'm being nitpicky here, but it leaves some of the ancestries in this book feeling less engaging for me, and that is a bit of a problem. Another example of small nitpicky problems that I have in this book is, well, if I'm being honest, I just wanted more stuff. I'm sorry, Paizo, I'm a greedy consumer, give me, give me, give me. In particular, one of the things that I wish we had gotten more on is the Arc Lords in Nex, and in particular, I would have loved some crunchy rules to help me play someone who either is an Arc Lord or is working for the Arc Lords. I would have loved to have seen some more content specifically for that group, especially given how powerful and prominent that group is. So those are a couple examples of nitpicky flaws that I have with this book, but if you can't tell, I'm definitely being nitpicky on those items. They don't drive me away from the content, they're just kind of things that jump out in a book that I otherwise really enjoy. On the opposite side of things, you have the strengths of this product, and I do want to spend a little more time talking about the strengths because, again, Paizo, what I have seen in this book is a much closer reflection to what I have wanted to see from the Lost Omens line for a while. Impossible Lands is easily a top 3 Lost Omens book for me overall because of how you handled the content here, and if I can do anything to encourage you to do more of this, yes please. So, there's one thing about Lost Omens Impossible Lands that jumped out to me as I read through this book. It stood out in a way that I'm not sure other Lost Omens books have jumped out to me in the past. And that is, this is a book that feels like it is supporting the story that you and your players are going to tell. That may seem weird. Allow me to elaborate. The 2 books that are the closest comparison to Impossible Lands would be Lost Omens Mwange Expanse and Lost Omens Absalom. And I liked both of those books, but both of those books had some problems. With Mwange Expanse in particular, if you saw my review of that book, you may remember that one of the things I said about that book is a lot of the crunch felt like something that was really Game Master oriented, like it was technically player character content, but it felt like player character content that would never actually be used by a player character. And a good example of that is the Galoma from Mwange Expanse. They feel like an ancestry that no player character will ever actually use. And if you were to compare how the Galoma are written in Mwange Expanse to how something like the Kashrishi are written in Impossible Lands, there is a qualitative difference in the support for storytelling in the Kashrishi over the Galoma. Both are rare ancestries. Both are, in terms of the Pathfinder setting, new additions to the content that Paizo gives us. They are both very fascinating groups. They're both very interesting groups. But the Kashrishi are written in such a way that they are much more useful in a wider variety of stories, and that feels good. If you saw my review of Lost Omens Absalom, you may remember one of the things I enjoyed about that book was it gave Game Masters a lot of story hooks, but it was almost devoid of player character crunch yet again. While I appreciated the good story content in Absalom, I walked away from that product feeling like it was something that my players would never really engage with. However, with Impossible Lands, you see that high-quality story hook content in the book, but it's presented in a way where I feel like players are much more interested in engaging with the material. With the first setting book, Mwange Expanse, Paizo did a really good job of portraying the cultures that it was adding to its setting. It did a really good job of setting the culture into the world, but struggled to set the story spinning. With Lost Omens Absalom, they did a good job with the culture and with adding some story into it, but they didn't do a good job of hooking players into the stories that were present. Not so with Lost Omens Impossible Lands. In this one, the cultures are well established, the stories are numerous and very engaging, the mysteries surrounding the Houses of Perfection and Jalmaray is, I think, incredibly entertaining, and that was a twist I did not see coming, Paizo. But not only are these things in the book, they are also presented in a way where players are going to engage with the story that is going on, and more importantly, with the rather abundant crunch that is in this book. Now, this is still a setting book, and like many other Lost Omens products, and especially the setting books, this is probably primarily a Game Master-oriented product, but there is a healthy variety of player-focused crunch in this book. New ancestries, new weapons, new archetypes, new options that players can use, and they are woven into this book in a way that I think players will find exciting and engaging and make them want to use what has been presented. When you have a good balance of setting lore and Game Master content and player options, and they are woven together in a way that it supports creating fun and interesting narratives, that's the kind of stuff I want to see. Paizo, we need more of this. It shines through this book, and it is the #1 strength of this product. Let's move on to the actual contents of the book, and I am going to be flying through this very quickly. I will focus in on a few chapters more than others, and most of those will be chapters that have a lot of player character content in them, but I want to talk about what you can expect to find if you were to dig through this book. The first chapter in this book is an introduction to the Impossible Lands and some of the overarching themes associated with the Impossible Lands. And one of the things Paizo does here is they take the time to pause and point out that many of the narrative inspirations in this portion of the Golarion setting are a little bit darker and more intense. And I appreciate the fact that Paizo takes the time to point this out and say, if you want to tell these stories, if you want to run with these themes, it is a good idea to discuss some of these things with your players beforehand. Because when you have things like a literal nation of undead that uses humans as food, that can get a bit dark, and you want to make sure your players are comfortable with the stories that they're going to be engaging with. But the first chapter is just an introduction to the region and the major ideas associated. The second chapter is going to be a history or timeline of the region and some of the major events that you want to be aware of. But the third chapter is where things are really going to start picking up, and where I think a lot of the engagement with this book is going to come from, and that is the peoples of the Impossible Lands. This chapter is going to discuss the different groups that live in the Impossible Lands and what you can expect from the different ancestries that might be inside of the game. So you'll get a discussion of what the human, dwarf, elf, and halfling cultures look like in the Impossible Lands and many of the other ancestries that exist for Pathfinder 2e. And then it also moves in to some more specific options that are very heavily associated with the Impossible Lands. First up, the Peoples chapter is going to expand on options for 3 ancestries or heritages that already exist in Pathfinder 2e. You're going to get some new options for the Fleshwarp ancestry, as well as new options for the Geniekin and Tiefling versatile heritages in Pathfinder 2e as well. All 3 of these have some pretty heavy ties to the Impossible Lands region. I can't dive into everything they do. I will say on the Tieflings that the Tieflings presented here focus more on the Asuras and the Rakshasas, and use those as kind of the evil heritage that your character is drawing from, and it's less focused on some of your classic demon or devil heritage tieflings. I think that's a fun twist, but if you're looking for new options for those existing ancestries and heritages, they've got those in this book, and they are a lot of fun. After that, you're going to get 5 new ancestries for Pathfinder 2e, though some of these ancestries are in fact returning ancestries from 1st edition. This is just the first time they're appearing in 2nd edition. But game masters and players are going to discover 5 new ancestries that they can use to add new characters to their games. The first up are the Gorin, which are plant folk that have a pseudo-reincarnation ability where they will plant a seed in the ground and grow a new version of themselves. When a new Gorin is born from this seed, it comes back to life with fragments of memories from its past lives, but also with a new personality and sense of self, allowing for each successive version of a Gorin to be a different and unique individual. The next completely brand new ancestry that is presented in Impossible Lands is the Kashrishi, which are short, psychic, rapidly evolving rhino beetle people with glowing horns. Yes, all of that was a coherent sentence, I swear, and this is one of those ancestries where you definitely want to dig in and read up on what Paizo came up with here, because there's just so much to dive into. I don't have time. I think Tommy at Black Dragon Gaming has actually done a deep dive video on these, so you may want to go check his work out, but Kashrishi is one of the new options. The third option presented is the Nagaji, which are a race of serpent folk with strong connections to Nagas, a particular type of monster in Pathfinder 2e. And one of the things I like about the Nagaji is the fact that they really allow them to have a variety of different shapes, from bipedal snake folks to humanoids with hooded serpent heads, to creatures that actually resemble a Naga in form in many ways. The Nagaji were a favorite ancestry of my gaming group in Pathfinder 1e, and it's cool to see all the ways they've expanded on them in this edition. Your fourth option are the Vanara, which are, in short, a group of trickster monkey folk that are blessed by a deity to, well, be tricksters across the land. Again, my friend Tommy over at Black Dragon Gaming has done a pretty good deep dive on this new ancestry, and I recommend checking out his work because he's highlighted a lot of the really cool storytelling aspects that Paizo gives here, and we've only got a limited amount of time, but Vanara are your fourth option. And the final and fifth new ancestry are the Vishkanya, which are a group of humanoids that are technically serpent folk, though many of their serpentine features are harder to see. One of their standout abilities is all Vishkanya are naturally venomous. Now, I will say this, with the Vishkanya and the Nagaji appearing in the same book, the Nagaji feel like they get a little bit better representation than the Vishkanya do. The Vishkanya kind of feel like they get the short end of the stick. Again, this is one of those you could nitpick a little bit. There's some fun stuff here, but I do think Paizo did a better job fleshing out the Nagaji and their role inside the story. But you still have the Vishkanya there as an option. I just feel like they got overshadowed a little bit. Then, after the Peoples chapter, you're going to get 6 consecutive chapters highlighting different regions inside of the Impossible Lands section. The first one is going to highlight Alkenstar and Dungan Hold. The second one is going to highlight a new region called Bopan. The third one is going to highlight the undead nation of Geb. The fourth one talks about the island nation of Jalmoray. The fifth one talks about the Mana Waste. And then the last one is going to cover the magical nation of Nex. And with all 6 of these chapters, you can expect multiple pages of deep dive setting information that will highlight some of the important characters that live there, some of the important groups that are power players in that region. You can expect important settlements to be highlighted. Most of these chapters are going to highlight at least 2 major cities in those regions. You're going to get a lot of deep setting information, and it would almost be too much to try to dive into everything that is discussed in this book, but allow me to say it is a storyteller's dream of content and inspiration, all of it, as I said in the strengths section, focused on really driving interesting stories. Paizo has done a good job really bringing the Impossible Lands to life. However, with each of these 6 sections, you're also going to get some player character focused content that you can pull out of these chapters. For example, in the Alkenstar Dungan Hold section, you're going to get new equipment such as the Pocket Watch. You're going to get a new companion that rangers and druids can take called the Water Wraith. There is a new gunslinger way that's presented called the Way of the Trigger Band. And you even have an archetype covering the Shield Marshals, the law enforcement group inside of Alkenstar. Now, I will say, to be a little bit nitpicky here, the Shield Marshal archetype only has 4 archetype feats, and while I enjoy them, I wish the Shield Marshal had been fleshed out just a little bit more. I wish there had been more options there. The stuff there is fun, but compared to some of the other archetypes in the game, it doesn't feel like it got as much as it needed. The chapter after that is called Bopon, and this is probably my second favorite chapter overall in this entire book. Bopon is a mysterious magical island nation run by a court of fairies that has, until very recently, been lost to history by Golarion. But the Pathfinders have found it again, and you know they're mounting an expedition, which means that this tiny island nation is going to be playing on the world stage again very soon. Bopon is a great place if you want to have beastkin or fae-related characters in your group. This is the perfect place that they can come from, as they might be emissaries, exiles, or other expatriates of this interesting fae nation. This section is going to come with a line of feats for Boponese Dance, which is a type of stance available to rogue swashbucklers and bards, as well as a line of fae-influence feats and a group of feats called the Greenwatch feats, representing special scouting training that gunslingers, investigators, and rangers can take if they train with the scouts that protect this particular nation. The next section is on the nation of Geb, which is the undead-ruled nation in the Golarion setting. Now, I will say that of the various chapters in this book, the chapter on Geb to me does feel a little bit shallow, but bear in mind, the Book of the Dead was recently released as a mainline product for Pathfinder 2e, and the lore of that book is it was literally written by Geb, so Geb has had a lot of publication lately. I'm not too upset that this chapter feels a little shallow. I still think you get a decent chunk of content here. It just feels a little bit less than some of the other chapters around it. Inside of this chapter, you'll also get a little bit of information on new curses, new spell catalysts, and a few new magical items that are associated with the nation of Geb. One of the really fun chapters in this book is on the island nation of Jalmaray, which is famous for the Houses of Perfection, where people study a wide variety of ancient and mysterious martial arts and train to compete in a once-a-decade martial arts tournament that is renowned all across Golarion. You will get a ton of fun setting information here, but in terms of player character specific content, you're going to see the new Seru-specific familiar, which is a familiar that takes the form of a tiny blue elephant covered in spikes. I'm not sure if that's adorable or terrifying or yes, but it is an option. You also get a list of new weapons, and in one of my favorite sections of this book, you get 4 pages of new options for the Student of Perfection archetype from Lost Omens World Guide. The Student of Perfection archetype is one of the archetypes that I feel never lived up to its potential from the World Guide, so I absolutely love the fact they took the time to expand on that here, and expand on it really well. There's actually a second archetype kind of buried in these pages called the Jalmaray Heaven Seeker, but it's also kind of an expansion on Student of Perfection. They still work together very well, so I consider them one and the same. I just really appreciate that the Houses of Perfection are getting some proper coverage, and I'm glad that Paizo is really shining a light on that part of the setting, because it's one of the portions of the setting I really enjoy that I don't feel has been covered well in the past. One of the shortest sections in this book is the chapter covering the Mana Waste, and I'm a little bit surprised they didn't just add this in with the Alkenstar chapter. I guess they wanted to break it up so that it wouldn't feel too overwhelming. This chapter is almost purely setting information. There is not a lot of player character focused content. There are some fun items called mana vials, where you can basically hit people and strike them with a wild magic surge. If you've seen my video on chaos magic items, you know I love this kind of content, so I was very happy to see that one. One of my favorite things in this chapter is they actually give Game Masters a table for Wellspring Surges of Magic, and that's something that I feel Paizo has needed to put in for a while, so I was glad to see that here. Your last major location chapter is going to cover the nation of Nex, which is the most explicitly magic-oriented portion of the Golarion setting. This is a nation of wizards, by wizards, for wizards. This is a nation where those who use and command magic hold the highest positions of authority, and where the hubris associated with the command of magic has certainly run amok over the centuries. To be honest, there's almost too much setting information in this chapter for me. I've tried to read it 3 times now, and every single time I kind of walk away going, just from the amount of content that they put in on the setting. And I think they do a good job of making the nation of Nex not the automatic good guy of the region. Like, they really give you the good and bad of this particular nation, and they do it in very flavorful ways. So I really enjoy the way that Nex is written, and they do give some fun player character options as well. You get some information on the cubes of Nex, which are some relatively regular and artifact level magical items that players might encounter. And in a shout out to the hubris associated with mages, they also give you a number of different Abraxan tattoo options that player characters can potentially use. These are magical tattoos that PCs can invest like other magical items, with the slight twist that it's technically fiendish magic, and no one's exactly sure if the tattoos come with any, shall we say, undisclosed side effects. There is also a section of the chapter on Nex on different ways that the denizens of Nex make use of oozes and new ooze items such as the goo grenade. Yes, you can throw goo grenades at people. This is an option. It's hilarious. It's disgusting. I love it. But far and away, my favorite mechanical offering in this entire book, and I didn't expect this, but when I saw it, my jaw hit the floor and I loved it immediately. The chapter on Nex gives you not 1, but 2 new incarnate spells for Pathfinder 2e. For those of you who may not be familiar, in Secrets of Magic, a new type of summoning spell called incarnate spells were added to the game, which are, you can kind of compare them to summons in a Final Fantasy game, where you summon a massive creature onto the battlefield, and it does some kind of crazy effect when it arrives and before it leaves, and they're just powerful and fun and flavorful. And there is a new 9th level incarnate spell that lets you summon ancient flesh-forged monstrosities that Nex used in his war against Geb onto the battlefield to deploy against your foes. I love this spell. It is amazing, and it is straight up an evil villain spell. I am using this on my players. I hope they're not watching this video. There are 2 more chapters in this book. I'm not going to dive too deep into them, but I do want to talk about them briefly. First up, you have the religion chapter, which is going to introduce a number of new deities that are common in the Impossible Land. Essentially, because the Impossible Lands exist so close to some of the other major continents on Golarion, some of the religious influences from those continents have started to integrate themselves into this section of the Inner Sea region. That means, among other things, that player characters in this area are going to have access to some new and interesting deities that they can call upon. And in an effort ultimately to fail to avoid sounding like an evil villain, I'm going to go ahead and say that my 2 favorite options are Diamazul, the Serpent of 80 Blades, and Mahathala, the Dowager of Illusions. For what it's worth, both of those new deities are lawful evil and inspire a lot of villain concepts for me as a GM. I love them. But with each deity, you will find the kind of information that you would expect for other deity entries in a Paizo product. You're going to see their edicts, their anathema, their favored weapons, and many of the other benefits associated with a character that might serve one of those deities if they were to follow them. After the religion section, you're also going to get a bestiary containing 15 new monsters that a game master might want to use if they were setting a game in the Impossible Lands. Some of the new monsters include flesh-forged monsters, which are creepy and delightful, and another one of my favorites is the new gunpowder ooze. I can't believe I haven't thought of that before, but I'm dropping that on my players sometime soon because it's wonderful. But that is an overview of what this book, Lost Omens Impossible Lands, includes and my thoughts on this product. Obviously, there is a ton of information in this book, and you could really dive in and go deep on a lot of this content. If there is something specific in this book you would like me to go back and take another look at and talk about a little more in depth, please let me know. I would be glad to do so. There's definitely a lot of great content here. And allow me to emphasize again, the way Paizo presents this material makes this one of my favorite Lost Omens books that they have put out through the entire Lost Omens line. It is really well done, balancing stuff for game masters and stuff for players at what I think are the right ratios and the right intensity to serve your story well. This book is really well done. It is still a niche product. You want to keep that in mind, but if you're making a niche product, this is how you do it. Paizo, good job. I really enjoyed this. But I think the time has come for me to turn the conversation over to you. What are your thoughts about Lost Omens Impossible Lands, and do you agree with my assessment of this book? Are there strengths of this book that I failed to mention? Are there weaknesses of this book that I overlooked? Please jump down to the comments section and let me know your thoughts, and don't forget all of that other YouTube stuff. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, check out my Discord and my Patreon. Both of those are linked in the video description. But as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation. Have a wonderful day.